One general law leading to the advancement of all organic beings, namely multiply, vary, the strongest live and the weakest die. This quote is about natural selection in the way that Charles Darwin looked at it. This speech is about the process of natural selection and how it works. Evolution was the beginning of what sparked the idea of natural selection. This was the first alternative to the argument from design. Not all would agree that natural selection is theory in itself, but it is intertwined with the idea of evolution. These people don't realize that natural selection and evolution feed off of each other as evidence to help each theory. According to globalchange.edu, Charles Darwin came up with the idea of natural selection when he traveled to the Galapagos Islands. He saw variations of tortoises and finches when he went to every island. Even these creatures varied from the ones like themselves on the main island 600 miles away. This shows the adaptation these species had to make to survive on each different island. The variance of these species is what led to Charles Darwin to think about this theory, natural selection. According to bioweb.edu, Darwin published his book on the origin of species, and that was the first outcoming of his idea of natural selection. According to ncbi.gov, this idea of natural selection had a process, and it starts with Charles Darwin's theory. This theory consisted of 3 ideas of evolution that would help explain the theory of natural selection. The first idea was that the species would evolve over time and over space. The second idea was that all organisms share the same ancestors. And the third idea was that the change of evolution is very gradual and very slow. With these 3 ideas, Charles Darwin came up with what he thought was the process of natural selection. The first part of the process of explaining natural selection was variation. Variation is the difference of individuals, which can include your hair color, your height, and even the number of offspring that you produce. Our diversity, or our variation, is dependent on a combination of alleles or traits. According to evolution.berkeley.edu, some basic mechanisms of evolution cannot operate without variance of traits or genes. This means that evolution and natural selection both depend on variation for the process to continue. Variation can come from gene flow, mutations, and even sex. Gene flow is the movement of genes from one population to another. Mutation is any change in DNA. Sex can be accountable for new gene combinations, which would cause variation. Another part of Darwin's process is inheritance. Inheritance is when traits are constantly passed down from parent to offspring, which means the traits are very heritable. Other traits that are not as easily passed down are traits that are modified by environmental conditions, which make them not so heritable. According to plot.stanford.edu, a trait has to be heritable to contribute to the theory of natural selection. Inheriting a trait and passing down the traits that are brought up by environmental conditions will choose who will be fit to survive in such an environment, thus the idea of natural selection. Population growth is another part of Charles Darwin's process in explaining natural selection. Population growth can lead to lack of resources and if the offspring keeps growing in numbers, this lack of resources can make some species have to learn to survive and stay alive, then passing on the favorable traits so they can survive in such conditions. Population growth would cause the species with the non-favorable traits to die off, so they can't pass on the non-favorable traits to their offspring. The last part of Charles Darwin's process of natural selection is different survival and reproduction. According to oic.yale.edu, this is the offspring that inherits the favorable traits that are suited to live in certain environmental conditions and will produce more offspring. This is where the selection comes into play. The selection of changes in results of the outcomes of traits, and this will cause diversity. These traits will be chosen not by the environment itself, but the actions that the creatures take to live in these conditions. If they survive, they will pass on the traits that they adapted onto their offspring so their offspring can survive as well. Evidence of natural selection helps explain the process a little bit better. Some examples of natural selection are the finches that were mentioned earlier. These birds vary from island to island like their beaks. Some beaks were fit to eat fruit, while others were fit to eat large seeds or small seeds. It depended on what the island had to offer, so they could adapt to what they were given. Another example is the evolution of opposable thumbs. We use our thumbs in a different way than what some scientists would call our ancestors, the chimps. Even cavemen back in the day used their thumbs differently than we do, and this is because we all have different living conditions. Some benefits to society of having some knowledge about this subject is getting to know about the reproduction and how it works. It's beneficial to know how traits and other things work and how they are passed down. Another benefit to society is knowing who our ancestors are and how we evolved from them. The last benefit to society is the realization of different ideas and subjects. Not everybody believes in natural selection or even evolution, but it is interesting and beneficial to learn about it. Charles Darwin came up with a theory to explain how we evolved in the way we did. We evolved from our ancestors. He diversified and changed the direction of scientific thought. So did he change your thoughts as well?